Welcome. My name is Philippe Verzeek and this webcast accompanies my book Data Analysis. In it, I will show you how to conduct an F-test in eViews. An F-test is designed to test whether or not multiple restrictions apply at the same time. Now, the most common of these restrictions is that you test for the joint significancy of two coefficients or more. What does it mean? We want to know if several independent variables belong in the model. Now this is of course only relevant in case you have a regression model with more than one independent variable. But that's actually a quite common situation, so let's have a closer look at this. Now suppose that I want to know in this equation if C3 and C4 are jointly significant. That means that I want to know if the coefficient for H and L and the coefficient for S and P are both equal to 0. For example, it could be the case that there is a difference between only having C1 and C2 in your model and C1, C2, C3 and C4. In fact, this is the case in this particular example. The C1 and C2 corresponds to a capital asset pricing model from the finance part of things. The C1 up to the C4 is actually corresponding to theory by Fama and French. So let's see what we get if we knock out C3 and C4, because that's what we need to do. We need to set them equal to 0 and then see if that significantly worsens the model. To do this, we go to the equation window and then go to view. This is not the view from the work file, this is the view from the equation. You'll get a different set of menu options below that. We go from view to coefficient diagnostics and then wall test, coefficient restrictions. Now the wall test is a more generalized version of the F-test. And what we then need to do is enter the restrictions as we want to impose them. Again, testing for significancy means that we set the coefficients equal to 0. So in this case, C3 is 0, comma space C4 equals 0. There are various ways of doing this, by the way. If you then press OK, you will get output which looks like this. Now, the first row here gives you the F-test. Now, the value of the F-statistic is quite high, and with the appropriate degrees of freedom for numerator and denominator, we get a p-value. And that's actually the only thing that matters. If the probability is below 5%, we reject the null hypothesis. If it is above 5%, we do not. We have a probability p-value which is, well, just as 0 as we can get in eViews, and this means that we reject our null hypothesis. So it's not the case that C3 is 0 and C4 is 0 at the same time. In fact, this was something we would have expected, because if we go back to our output view, estimation output, we see that C3 is significant in its own right. If you then conduct an F-test with testing for joint significancy, you are almost certain to get the corresponding answer. If one of the two belongs in the model, then you cannot remove both of them. However, with an F-test you could also test for other restrictions. If I go again back to the wall test, I could also say that, for instance, C3 is equal to minus 4. This has no particular use in terms of theory, but we might end up with cases where it actually does. And this technique therefore allows you to conduct tests at pretty much any null hypothesis that you care to do. Now this is just one restriction, and this would actually correspond to a t-test. Now the F-test on one restriction should give the same answer as a t-test, so that really doesn't matter. But let's, for the sake of completeness, add something else as well. Let's put C4 equal to plus 4 and see what comes out of it. Once again, this is something that is utterly rejected, this null hypothesis. This is not going to be the case. Now, given the fact that the output values were very different from this was to be expected. This was just an example to see how it's done. Another possible important note is that if you do not enter the complete formula with C1, C2, etc. in the initial equation when you estimate your model, then you may need to figure out which coefficient belongs to which variable. This can always be done by looking at view and then representations. This will give you, no matter how you estimate your equation, the complete version with the C1, C2s, and so on, which eViews uses internally.